Now we'll turn to the other piece of big news from today, which will affect all of us in Massachusetts. This morning, Governor Baker and a special panel released a report that highlighted just how widespread and deep the problems run at the MBTA. In a moment, Transportation Secretary Pollack will speak more about those issues and the planned fixes. But first, WGBH's Stephanie Leyden has some of the main findings laid out in today's report.
The key driver in the MBTA's disastrous performance this winter, says the panel, was not historic snowfall, but a history of mismanagement. Among the key findings, the average T worker takes 57 days a year off, not counting weekends and holidays, and the MBTA failed to spend $2 billion in available revenue to replace deteriorating equipment and infrastructure. Now the governor is calling for the legislature to replace the T's current board of directors with a 5-member fiscal and management control board.
Finally, the panel's findings make clear, at least to me, that the T's current way of doing business needs to be remade before it makes sense to invest significant sums of outside new money into its operation.
The governor says eventually the T will need additional money from the state, but a former Secretary of Transportation says money should be allocated now.
What we need now is a quick injection of funds without having to raise taxes, without having to raise fares. And the solutions that I have been talking about, which are both debt relief and shifting highway dollars to transit, would do that.
Also on the table, eventually, fare hikes. The panel says compared to other big city transit systems, a ride on the T is cheap. But advocates say it needs to remain affordable.
In 2013, the legislature passed a cap on fare increases that is 5% every 2 years. We would urge that predictable, regular fare increase stay in place.
But the panel seems to indicate that riders are willing to pay more. So do you anticipate pretty significant fare hikes?
I think we have to think about all riders, and some riders are not able to afford more.
Next stop for this plan to get the T back on track, the state legislature. Stephanie Leyden, WGBH News.
Joining me now for more on this is the woman in the middle of the whole thing, the Transportation Secretary, Stephanie Pollack. It's great to see you, Secretary.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
So is there anything, can you have a Cliff Notes version of anything that Stephanie may have left out that you think is central to the findings of this panel today, or no?
I think the most important finding is that the T is essentially insolvent unless it gets large and continuously larger injections of money from the legislature, which is just not acceptable. So we need to put the brakes on the expense increases and make things work.
You know, I am relatively well known for making incorrect political predictions. I made another one here. I thought it was going to be one of those reform before revenue thing. It's reform, but some revenue, right? Almost simultaneously, or is that not the approach you're taking?
No, the panel specifically rejected that there is even a reform revenue dichotomy, but what they said is the revenue has to come at a time when the T is capable of spending it, and the agency is so dysfunctional at the moment, it's not actually spending the resources it has.
So things like ad revenue, potentially removing the cap on fares, that's not in the immediate future? That's somewhere down the line?
That stuff's in the immediate
future. So it is, yeah.
Absolutely.
So what does it mean? Let's talk about the fares, which I'm sure is the thing that most people feel is the dagger in the heart kind of thing. We get rotten service, now you're going to charge us more for rotten service while you're getting it better. What are they like? If you get your way with legislature, obviously you need legislative approval to remove to lift the cap. What kind of fee increase, what kind of fare increase might they see, Stephanie Pollack?
I mean, I think interestingly we've heard from riders that if they knew they were getting better service, they'd be willing to pay more. And the other thing is that a fare increase doesn't mean it across the board. That's how the T's done it in the past. But other systems are experimenting with basing fares on ability to pay. The T is actually about to pilot a need-based fare program for a small subset of riders. So, you know, fares don't have to be the first place the T goes, but the panel's findings are that we expect very little of our riders compared to what we get from taxpayers statewide, and that balance needs to be adjusted.
The portion I read in one of the previews of this, the portion of the actual cost of the ride to a rider here is roughly half of the portion that's borne in places like San Francisco, which is pretty shocking to me. So you don't have a number in mind. You don't know if the legislative leader said how much we need to raise these fares to get you on track, to use a horrible pun. You don't have a number yet.
No, there's no specific number.
Are you looking for power to abrogate union contracts? I know there's this control board. I don't know what it means in English. I mean, what power do you want this financial control board to have?
So specifically, the panel asked for control board and not receivership. Receivership was actually considered. Receivers do do have the power to basically set aside collectively bargained agreement. The panel didn't want to go that far. Their hope is that, and they didn't, they actually even looked into what if we just abolished the T and created a whole new transit system. And their hope is that this Financial Control Board, which is the model that's been used to get Springfield, Massachusetts, the city, back on track, is enough oversight, but in a way that hopefully is collaborative.
So how do you deal with these excesses that you guys are talking about? Like this panel came out and said 57 days, absentee days, some totally legit, sick and vacation, that sort of thing, but roughly twice the national average in comparable kinds of settings. How do you deal with that if you were in a position where you have to honor the deal that the management of the T struck with their workers?
But the deal the T has with its workers actually prohibits sick day abuse and provides for discipline. There's a real management problem at the T.
Okay, so Charlie Baker has said over the last few months since this mess, he's frustrated because everybody just said we should raise taxes. And then the State House News Service reports that, I don't have the exact quote, but you were there, we had to take some time, perhaps several years, before we're willing to ask taxpayers to pay more. Does that mean what I think it means? That he's saying if we get these reforms in place and we get things sort of back moving in the direction, the no-tax governor may go to the public and say we got to raise taxes to do the final part of this fix?
The panel said once the T is fixed, the capital that they will need to get the problems with the system, the maintenance, the billions of dollars that haven't been spent to fix what we have and buy new trains and buses is going to require new revenue. And I think the governor has been very clear, and he and I have talked about this before the panel discussion, that he's not averse to that, but he's got to make sure that it's money well spent. And, you know, the T was given hundreds of millions of additional dollars in 2009 by the legislature and again in 2013. And one of the things the panel found is it's not being spent.
Yeah, but this is a pretty big deal. I want to be clear here. I understand their preconditions, but Charlie Baker has said pretty directly to me and everybody else who's asked, no fees, no tax, not just for transportation, for anything else. What you and he are saying now is under the proper conditions, if we do the kinds of reforms, pick up some new revenue from fares, ads, whatever we do, if I am convinced that we need a tax increase to finish the job, I, Charlie Baker, will support such a tax increase?
What he's saying is he's not going to rule it out, and I think that shows how important he thinks transit is to our economy.
So are you responsible for that? I assume the answer. No, I'm going to read. Here's a quote from you from 2 years ago, which probably has been read to you only about 10,000 times. Let's make it 10,001. Here it is. You said 2 years ago, Massachusetts cannot stay competitive regionally, nationally, or globally without making substantial long-term investment, creating a 21st century transportation system. Then you were with me 2 years ago in another universe on NECN, and I was discussing with you the $1 billion tax and fee hike that Governor Patrick won at the time. You were at Northeastern at that time. And I was saying that, to invest in transportation. I said a lot of people think it's unaffordable. Do you remember what you said back to me?
You're going to tell me.
We can't afford not to do it. So I'm serious about this, is the Stephanie Pollack school of thinking in your former life before you changed jobs, now, is it been embraced by your boss? Why do you have that smile on your face like you do? Has it been embraced? I mean, is he a...
So, you know, I come from academia, right? If I had said, let's design a natural experiment to show what happens to the economy if you shut down the transit system, everyone would have laughed at me, right? But what we saw this winter, what employers saw, what mayors saw, is you shut down the transit system, you shut down the economy. So people understand that if we need to invest in the transit system to make the economy work, we should. The problem is the T, as it currently exists and is managed, is not yet trustworthy to make those investments. Once we get to that point, I don't see that there's any opposition to making those investments.
And would those investments, once you get to that point, also include expansion, which I know is a dirty word, at least right now, until you fix what is? Will that be on the Baker-Pollack agenda down the road?
So I think one of the things the panel was really thoughtful about was this idea that there's an inherent tension between expansion and repairing. And what they said is we need to maintain and modernize the system. We need to meet our future transit needs, but we need a clear-headed, practical plan for doing that. And once such a plan is in place, then we can talk about how to pay for it.
Are you totally convinced you can do this?
I am totally convinced we have to do this. So therefore, I will spend every ounce of energy I have to make it happen.
And I've only seen you speak a few times. You're a big idea transportation kind of woman. Are there big ideas here, or is this just going to be fix so that we can do what we have to do, but not this grand vision. Is there a grand vision in this?
So there's not a grand vision yet. There's a call for a grand vision in the form of this plan. And what I think is that big ideas are what gives the people the optimism to keep going and slogging through all the hard work that lies ahead to fix the T that is very badly broken.
I will join everybody in Massachusetts in wishing you luck, Stephanie Pollack.
Thank you very much,
Good to
Joe.
see you.